Have you ever heard of the men in black suits in the spirits world?
Oh, man. Yeah, the enforcers.
Right. And I'm not talking about like government agents or anything. I'm talking about the enforcers of tradition, specifically the Scottish Whiskey Association.
Yeah, they do not mess around.
No, they really don't. This is a group that maintains this absolute rigid, centuries-old purity of how whiskey is made. In their world, there is a very specific playbook.
Exactly.
You follow the rules about what grains you use, how long you wait, and crucially, what kind of wood you use, or they will literally shut your operation down.
Yeah, they essentially view themselves as the guardians of an ancient craft. So when a product is defined entirely by its history, any deviation from that history, it isn't seen as innovation, it's seen as a threat.
A threat to the whole category.
Right. The legislation protecting Scotch is just incredibly dense. Every variable is locked down. And the whole point of that is to ensure that the global expectation of that specific flavor profile, that it never wavers.
Which is why today's deep dive is so fascinating. We're looking at a story that takes that massive, intimidating rulebook and just throws it completely out the window.
Oh, totally.
We're jumping into Thornæs Distillery. This is located in North Zealand, Denmark. And the founder is a guy named Torben Thornæs. And, his background is what makes this so compelling to me.
Because he's an outsider.
Exactly. He isn't from some multi-generational distilling family. He was a journalist.
Right, which explains so much about his process.
It really does.
Yeah.
His entire professional training was built around looking at accepted narratives and asking, but why does it have to be this way?
Yeah, a journalist's instinct is always to question the premise, right?
Yeah.
So when he entered distilling with zero formal training, he didn't have that burden of tradition holding him back.
He could just experiment.
Exactly. And to really picture what he built, I mean, for you listening, imagine stepping out of the cold Danish air and walking into his warehouse. It's this very traditional dunnage-style warehouse.
Which, for anyone unfamiliar with that term, is basically the exact opposite of a modern sterile factory.
Right, yeah.
Dunnage warehouses usually have these earthen or dirt floors, really thick stone or brick walls, and low slate roofs. And the barrels are stacked, like no more than 3 high?
Yeah, usually just 2 or 3 high. And that architecture is entirely intentional. The dirt floor and the thick walls, they create this highly specific, naturally regulated microclimate.
It stays consistent.
Exactly. It stays cool and relatively humid all year round. And that allows the surrounding air to interact with the casks at a very slow, controlled pace.
Wow.
So if you're standing in there, breathing in that heavy scent of aging wood and evaporating spirits, you'd be surrounded by about 550 individually numbered casks.
That is a lot of whiskey.
It's roughly 80,000 to 90,000 liters.
And what's wild is that every single one of those casks represents a test of a different industry dogma, like a different rule being broken.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this and you want to know how questioning established rules can lead to crazy innovation, this is the deep dive for you. And the best place to see that journalist mindset in action is at the very beginning of the process.
The raw liquid in the barrel.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this. The golden rule in traditional whiskey is the 30-70 split.
The old reliable rule of thumb.
Yeah. Conventional wisdom says that only 30% of a whiskey's flavor comes from the distillation process. The raw, clear spirit that comes out of the copper stills.
And the rest is the wood.
Exactly. The other 70% is supposedly dictated by the barrel it sits in for a decade.
And I mean, the science behind that 70% figure is real. It's rooted in how oak acts as both a filter and a flavoring agent.
Right.
Over the years, the alcohol slowly breaks down the complex polymers in the wood, so it extracts compounds like vanillin, which obviously gives you those sweet vanilla notes, and tannins, which provide structure.
So the traditionalists believe the still is just a blank canvas, and the barrel is the actual painting.
That's the mindset, yeah. But Torben rejects that entirely.
Totally rejects it. He believes in a 50-50 split.
Which is bold.
It is. He wants the character of the raw distillation, the specific Danish barley he uses, the local water, the exact shape of his stills. He wants all of that to stand shoulder to shoulder with the barrel.
He doesn't want the wood to act like a mask.
Right. He wants them in a balanced dialogue. But achieving that balance requires understanding exactly how your specific raw spirit reacts to different environments.
And the only way to learn that is through trial, error, and frankly, a lot of failure.
Which he planned for. When he founded Thornæs in 2020, he intentionally limited his production to just 2,500 liters for the entire year.
That is such a small batch.
Yeah, he built a financial and physical runway that allowed him to make mistakes without bankrupting the company. And the mechanism he used to learn from those mistakes is just fascinating to me.
The tiny casks.
Yeah. He didn't use the massive standard industry barrels. He bought tiny 50-liter and 55-liter casks. He actually calls them this in Formula One casks.
Which is such a great name for them. Because if you think about the physical geometry of a barrel, right? In a massive 200-liter cask, a significant portion of the liquid is just floating in the center.
It's not even touching the wood.
Right, it's completely insulated from the walls. So it takes years for all the liquid to cycle through and interact with the charred interior.
But by shrinking it down.
Exactly. By shrinking the environment down to 50 liters, the surface area to volume ratio just skyrockets. Almost every drop of the spirit is in constant, violent contact with the active wood char.
So the extraction of flavors, the chemical reactions between the alcohol and the wood sugars, it all happens at this exponentially accelerated rate.
It's essentially a flavor time machine.
Right. Instead of laying down a recipe and waiting like half a decade to find out if your recipe worked,
Yeah.
you get the feedback loop in months.
6 to 12 months, usually.
That is incredible.
What's fascinating here is that this is essentially the physical manufacturing equivalent of agile software development.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Right. In tech, you build a minimum viable product, test it, gather data, tweak the code, and push an update in a matter of weeks. But the whiskey industry operates on a decade-long product cycle.
And Torben basically hacked that cycle.
He did. By speed-running the maturation process in those Formula One casks, he was able to rapidly test endless variables. Danish oak, Bulgarian oak, sherry casks, bourbon finishes, you name it.
And once he had that data, he could scale up safely. He wasn't guessing anymore.
Right.
So by 2022, he takes the training wheels off, he transitions away from the micro casks and starts filling massive 200-liter, 225-liter, and even 500-liter casks, ramping his production up from 2,500 liters to 30,000 liters a year.
Which is a huge jump.
Yeah.
But that rapid learning curve from the small casks is what gave him the audacity to experiment with, honestly, the most controversial element in his entire warehouse.
Yes. Because once you know how your raw spirit behaves, you start looking for new unconventional partners for it to dance with.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the Chestnut Rebellion.
It's Chestnut Rebellion, yeah.
So we mentioned the men in black suits from the Scottish Whisky Association earlier, and one of their most unbreakable laws is that Scottish whiskey must be aged in oak, period.
No exceptions.
If you use a different wood, you lose your certification. But Denmark falls under European Union regulations for spirits, which are, well, they're a lot less puritanical.
The EU simply states that the spirit must be aged in wooden casks.
Any wood.
Right. And the discovery of chestnut's potential actually happened on Scottish soil, ironically enough.
Wait, really?
Yeah, Torben was visiting a distillery in Scotland, and the operators took him into a back room. And they had a few chestnut casks hidden away, secretly aging liquid.
No way.
Yes. They swore him to secrecy because they were terrified of the SWA finding out and slapping them with fines or shutting them down completely.
That is amazing.
So Torben tries the liquid, recognizes the immense flavor potential, and decides to make chestnut a foundational pillar of the Tornæs identity in Denmark.
Okay, but oak is the industry standard for a very good reason. It is incredibly dense, watertight, and reliable. Chestnut is a totally different beast.
Biologically, it's completely different. It lacks a specific cellular structure found in oak called tyloses.
Tyloses.
Yeah, which are basically tiny plugs that seal the vessels in the wood. So without those plugs, chestnut is highly porous. It breathes aggressively.
And that aggressive breathing means the liquid forces its way deep into the staves very quickly. It pulls out intense, unique flavors at a shocking speed.
Which makes chestnut this unparalleled vessel for prematuration or for a really quick, impactful finish before bottling. But
There's a big but.
But the porous nature of the wood creates a massive logistical nightmare on the warehouse floor.
You were talking about the angel's share.
I am.
So for anyone who doesn't know, the angel's share is this really poetic term for the liquid that just evaporates through the pores of the barrel and disappears into the atmosphere over time.
Right, and in a cool Scottish warehouse using tight oak barrels, you might lose, 1.5% to 2% of your liquid a year?
Right. But with Torben's porous chestnut barrels, he is losing 10% to 12% of his total volume in the very first year alone.
It's wild. And evaporation isn't even the only structural issue.
Right, the knots.
Yes. Chestnut wood is notoriously knotty. And think about how wood reacts to temperature changes. When the Danish summer warms the warehouse, the long staves of the barrel expand. When winter hits, they contract.
But the branches and nuts embedded in that wood.
They do not expand and contract at the same rate as the surrounding grain. They stay rigid.
So as the barrel shifts with the seasons, the wood literally pulls away from the knots, creating physical holes.
Exactly. So Torben and his team have to constantly patrol the warehouse aisles, visually inspecting these casks, because they will just randomly start bleeding precious whiskey onto the dirt floor.
Okay, let me just push back here for a second.
Ah.
Because, wait, losing 12% of your product in a single year, plus having to babysit leaky knots every time the weather changes. From a business perspective, that sounds like an absolute nightmare.
Oh, it is.
Is the flavor really worth that headache?
What's fascinating here is that the headache itself is the foundation of his strategic moat.
Really?
Yeah. Torben understood that if he just made a really good oak-aged single malt, he'd be competing against centuries of Scottish heritage and billion-dollar marketing budgets.
Oh, I see.
Right? By embracing a material that is literally illegal in Scotland and logistically terrifying for mass producers, he carved out a monopoly in a microscopic niche.
Yeah, that makes so much sense.
When whiskey enthusiasts hear Torns, they immediately think of chestnut maturation. He bought instant global brand differentiation, and he basically paid for it with the angel's share and some extra labor.
So we have a rapidly iterating founder using porous, leaking, illegal wood to build a unique flavor profile.
Yes.
Which brings us to the next major clash with tradition. And this happens when that liquid actually leaves the barrel and goes into the bottle.
Ah, the bottling philosophy.
Right, because the whiskey industry is driven by two massive consumer cults. The cult of age and the cult of high alcohol content.
Yes, the 12-year-old label is practically a religious artifact in spirits marketing.
It really is.
Consumers have been trained for decades to believe that a whiskey hasn't matured into something worthwhile until it crosses that specific 12-year threshold. The number on the bottle becomes a proxy for quality.
But Torben approaches this with that cold, journalistic logic we talked about. He argues that if your distillation process yields a harsh, unbalanced, flawed spirit, leaving it in a wooden box for a dozen years isn't going to magically fix it.
No, it just means you have a bad spirit that now tastes heavily of wood tannins.
Exactly. Time is an ingredient, not a cure.
Right, and because Torben uses those active chestnut casks and the highly reactive smaller barrels we discussed, his liquid reaches its peak flavor profile rapidly.
So Torben frequently releases bottles at 3.5 to 4.5 years old.
Yeah.
And they completely omit the age statement on the label.
Which is brilliant. They force the consumer to evaluate the liquid purely on its sensory merits, stripping away the psychological bias of a high number.
Which naturally leads into the second cult he fights, the cask strength movement.
Oh, this is a big one right now.
There is a huge trend among whiskey aficionados where the ultimate badge of honor is drinking a whiskey exactly as it comes out of the barrel, entirely undiluted. We are talking about alcohol by volume percentages, pushing 55%, 58%, even over 60%.
Yeah, there is a certain macho appeal to cask strength. It's this belief that adding even a drop of water is somehow watering down the artistic integrity of the spirit.
Like you're ruining it.
Right. It's viewed as the rawest, purest expression of the distillery.
But Torben looks at cask strength and sees a failure of leadership.
That's a strong way to put it, but yeah.
He argues that bottling a whiskey at 60% just because that's how it exited the barrel means the distiller refused to make a final decision about how the product should be experienced.
And honestly, the chemistry of dilution is incredibly complex and widely misunderstood by consumers.
Let's get into that.
Yeah, adding water to whiskey prior to bottling isn't just an act of stretching the inventory to make more money. It fundamentally alters the physical structure of the liquid.
How so?
Well, flavor compounds in whiskey, like esters and phenols, have different solubilities. Some are hydrophilic, meaning they bind well with water, and some are hydrophobic, meaning they repel water and bind to the ethanol.
So when you add high-quality water to a cask-strength whiskey,
You break those ethanol bonds. The water forces those hydrophobic flavor oils to the surface. It can literally transform a closed-off, aggressively alcoholic liquid into something that blooms with hidden fruit notes or subtle spices.
wow. So what does this all mean? It sounds like bottling at cask strength is like releasing the raw, unedited footage of a movie.
That's a perfect analogy.
Right. Torben is saying that adding water is the editing process. It's how you actually direct the final experience for the audience.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Torben considers dilution to be his final, most crucial act of curation. He's using water to sculpt the chemical profile, hunting for the exact equilibrium where the heat of the alcohol supports, rather than suffocates, the flavors.
And for Thornæs, that sweet spot usually lands right around 50% ABV, or sometimes dialed down to 49.2% or 49.4% depending on the batch.
He takes absolute ownership of the final taste.
But okay, the theory is sound, right? And the philosophy is very confident. But the true test is whether this highly curated, meticulously edited approach actually survives contact with a tasting panel.
The moment of truth.
Exactly. And the source material provides this fascinating window into this with a live side-by-side tasting of two vastly different Thornæs expressions.
Yeah, this tasting is so revealing.
So the first glass the podcasters in the source analyze is a whiskey aged in a Pedro Ximénez cask.
Pedro Ximénez, or PX, is a type of Spanish sherry. It's known for being incredibly thick, dark, and syrupy sweet.
Right. And this specific bottle was brought down to Torben's preferred 50% ABV. It's priced at 795 Danish krone and released in a microscopic run of just 193 bottles.
Very exclusive.
But a PX cask is a heavy hitter.
It is, and the tasting panel's reaction is generally positive, but with a massive caveat. They note these heavy, rich flavors. Imagine raisins that have been soaking in alcohol for a month, layered with dark syrup and heavy caramel.
A total dessert profile.
Exactly.
But remember Torben's golden rule from the very beginning.
The 50-50 split.
Right, he wants his distillation character to shine through equally with the wood. But the panel notes that the PX sherry influence is so loud, so dominant, that it completely erases the Thornæs DNA.
Yeah, the ester profile of his raw spirit is basically buried under a landslide of fortified wine.
So they ultimately score it an 86 or 87 out of 100.
Which, in the hypercritical world of whiskey tasting, basically implies the liquid is perfectly drinkable, but entirely mainstream.
It lacks that idiosyncratic signature that a boutique distillery relies on for its reputation.
The heavy finishing cask effectively cannibalized the foundational spirit.
Right. So then the panel moves to the second glass.
And this is where it gets so good.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because this completely shatters everything Torben claims to stand for.
It really does.
It is a cask sample of whiskey that spent its life in Danish oak before being finished in a bourbon cask. But the critical detail, it is served straight from the barrel at a blistering 58 to 60% ABV.
Uncut, unedited, raw cask strength.
The exact format Torben argues is a lack of directorial decision-making.
Yep.
So the tasters put it to their lips, and they are completely floored.
Blown away.
The flavor profile is erratic and brilliant. They describe aggressive notes of unsweetened English licorice colliding with burnt brown sugar. They call it edgy, challenging, yet surprisingly friendly on the palate, despite the massive alcohol heat.
And they score it a 91 or 92. They declare it the greatest expression of Thornæs whiskey they have ever encountered.
Doesn't this tasting completely contradict Torben's own philosophy? He hates cask strength, yet his cask strength sample is the highest rated whiskey of the day. Did he accidentally prove himself wrong?
It's hilarious, honestly. The raw intensity that Torben usually tries to tame with water actually elevated this specific batch into something extraordinary.
And there's this incredible moment of tension during the tasting. A rumor surfaces that this specific Danish oak batch is destined for the shelves of a major Danish supermarket chain called Median.
Oh yeah, they were panicking.
The panel is sitting there, terrified. They are openly begging the universe that Torben doesn't take this masterpiece into his editing bay and water it down to 50% for the mass market.
They want the raw footage.
They do. And the irony is profound. A founder built his entire ethos on rejecting the macho culture of cask strength, prioritizing meticulous dilution to achieve balance, yet his highest-rated creation is the very thing he philosophically opposes.
It just highlights a fundamental truth about organic chemistry and barrel maturation. You can write all the rules you want, but the barrel always gets the final vote.
The barrel gets the final vote. I love that.
True mastery in any craft isn't just about creating a rigid set of operational philosophies. It's possessing the humility to recognize when a specific magical anomaly occurs that demands you abandon your own rules.
Because the Danish oak cask was perfect exactly as it was.
Exactly. The liquid overruled the creator.
Wow. So we've seen Torben dismantle the 30-70 rule using his tiny Formula One casks. We've watched him embrace the chaos of 12% apparition and leaky chestnut wood just to build a moat against the Scottish traditionalists.
Right.
We've explored the chemistry of water dilution and seen his own cask-strength liquid force him to rethink his stance on editing.
The entire operation is a monument to challenging established norms. But, and there's a big but here hidden in the shadows of that North Zealand warehouse, tucked away from the rapid-fire experimentation and the 4-year release cycles, there is a single solitary barrel that completely defies the narrative.
Oh, this is my favorite part. The founder's cask.
The founder's cask. In 2021, amidst all this talk of age being a meaningless metric, Torben quietly filled a single malt bourbon cask.
Just one.
Just one. And he didn't put it in a 50-liter Formula One barrel to speed up time. He didn't put it in porous chestnut. He used traditional wood, and he laid it down with a very specific, unbreakable intention. He will not open it until his 60th birthday.
Which means he is intentionally creating a 12-year-old whiskey.
The very concept he has spent years arguing against.
It creates this fascinating philosophical trap for a man who built his entire legacy on speed and agility.
It really does. Because when he finally turns 60 and tacks that cask, he will have to face the ghost of the Scottish traditionalists. If he drinks it and it is the greatest liquid he has ever produced, he has to admit that perhaps the ancient dogma of a 12-year wait holds real merit.
But wait, what if he opens it, takes a sip on his 60th birthday, and realizes it tastes over-oaked and tired?
That's the other side of the coin.
What if he realizes that the vibrant, chaotic 4-year-old chestnut whiskey he makes every day is vastly superior to the 12-year traditional approach?
He'll have waited over a decade just to prove himself right all along.
That is wild. Whether the founder's cask is an act of ultimate faith in traditional maturation or just an extremely long-term science experiment, the answer is literally locked inside the wood.
The liquid is just sitting in the dark, slowly breathing through the staves, keeping its secrets until the day the cork is finally pulled.
I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Thank you for diving into the rule-breaking chemistry of Thornæs Distillery with us. Keep questioning the dogmas in your own field, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.